Think you can just walk away? I'll ruin you." Derek's voice thundered as he burst into the dining room. I sat frozen at the table, my fingers clenching the edges of my breakfast plate. To anyone else, this mansion screamed of wealth and success, pristine marble floors, walls adorned with priceless art. But to me, it was a cage I couldn't escape. To the outside world, I lived in luxury. Inside, I was a butterfly with clipped wings. His words echoed in the spacious room, but I had to stand my ground. "You can't control me forever, Derek." "Oh, you think so?" He leaned in, his face inches from mine. His eyes were cold and calculating. "What makes you think you can survive without me?" His words were a chilling reminder of how deeply I was trapped. Each day was a struggle to maintain composure, knowing full well that Derek's manipulative grip on my life was tightening. We had once been in love, or at least I thought we were. But those days were long gone, replaced by a harsh reality. Derek's anger flared over the littlest things. A misplaced document, a social mishap. Everything was met with his fiery temper. "You think anyone else will take you? You're nothing without me." My heart ached every time he belittled me, yet I found strength in the resolve building inside. My silence was no longer a sign of surrender but a tactic for survival. Still, in moments like these, standing up to him felt like a small but significant victory. He knocked the back of the chair, sending it tumbling to the floor. I didn't flinch, outwardly playing the part of the composed wife. Inside, adrenaline coursed through my veins. "I have connections, you know," he continued, voice low but threatening. "One word from me and you're finished." I took a deep breath, shaking a little. "There was once a time you spoke kindly, Derek. What happened?" "Life happened, Emma," he spat. "You wanted this life, remember?" Once upon a time, I believed in the dream he sold me. A vision of love and prosperity, where my ambitions as a small-town girl from Ohio could flourish in the big city. But over time, his charismatic mask slipped, revealing the domineering tyrant beneath. I stood up, my chair sliding back with a loud scrape. "I wanted a partnership, not a prison." Derek chuckled darkly. "Prison? Is that what you call this? Some would kill for your lifestyle." I picked up the fallen chair, setting it back in place. "What good is luxury if you're miserable?" His chuckles stopped, replaced by a cold, silent stare. "Remember, Emma, you're nothing without me." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me to collect the shattered pieces of my composure. I looked around the room, etched in marble and gold, yet devoid of warmth. The walls seemed to close in around me, reminding me daily of the life I once dreamed of, now turned nightmare. I drew in a deep breath, thinking momentarily about the days that brought me here. Days filled with hope and ambition, now lost to Derek's control. If only I had listened to my parents. They warned me about the dangers of big city charm masking ruthless intent. Dreams of success led me here, but it was the nightmares that kept me. Now I had to find a way out. I needed a plan, allies, and most of all, the courage to take my life back. This was only the beginning of my stand against Derek, and I vowed I wouldn't back down. As the door slammed shut, I whispered to myself, "This ends now." Moving from Ohio to Chicago was supposed to be my big break. I remember the day I told my parents. My mom, Martha, had her doubts. "The city's no place for a girl like you, Emma. You have everything you need right here." "But Mom," I argued, "there's so much more out there. Opportunities, adventures." Dad gave me a silent nod, a man of few words but filled with the quiet strength that always pushed me forward. "If it's what you want, go for it." The city was as daunting as it was exciting. I juggled 2 part-time jobs while trying to squeeze into the fast-paced world of business and networking. Long shifts and sleepless nights became my routine. I seemed out of place at first, a small-town girl learning to run with the big dogs. Every day felt like a test. But I pressed on, determined to make my mark. Then I met Derek. It was at an upscale networking event, held in one of those swanky hotels where the chandeliers almost outshine the stars outside. I was a bundle of nerves, trying to play the part of the polished businesswoman. Derek approached me with a charm that felt like pure warmth in the cold, glittering crowd. "You look like you could use a drink," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. "First time?" I smiled nervously, taking the flute. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed, a sound that would later haunt me. "A bit, but you've got the passion. I can see it." Our conversations were endless, his words painting vivid pictures of success and partnership. The more he talked, the more I felt seen and understood. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Derek was a self-made man, or so he claimed, who understood the struggles and triumphs. "Come, let me show you the city," he urged one night after dinner, the lights of Chicago glittering around us. "I want you to see what's possible." Serenades beneath the skyline, gifts, and promises filled the whirlwind romance that followed. I was dizzy with the rush of it all. A small-town girl flung into a bustling metropolis, swept off her feet by a man with seemingly endless resources. One evening, after an exquisite dinner at a five-star restaurant, Derek took my hand, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Marry me, Emma. Let's conquer the world together." I was speechless, my heart pounding. It felt like a dream, too good to be true. "Derek, this is so sudden." He squeezed my hand tighter, his smile softening. "When you know, and I know we're perfect together." The proposal was public, extravagant, and irresistible. My doubts drowned in the sea of his assurances. I said yes, and the rush of that moment made everything else fade away. The wedding was a monument to opulence. Every detail screamed perfection, from the delicate, hand-sewn lace on my dress to the lavish spread of food that seemed never-ending. Family and friends gathered under crystal chandeliers, watching as Derek and I exchanged vows that now felt like a lifetime away. In those moments, staring into his eyes, I believed in the future we built. Yet, not long after, the illusion began to crumble. Derek's charm started to wear off, revealing cracks in his golden persona. The man who once whispered sweet words of love and ambition now spoke with a sharp edge. "You're not trying hard enough," he snapped one evening when I expressed concerns about his latest business venture. "Do you even care about our success?" The cracks widened with each passing day, exposing rifts that words alone couldn't heal. The man who promised to elevate me had slowly begun the descent into a controlling tyrant. But at that point, it was too late to turn back. I glanced at the glittering city outside the window, remembering the hope and excitement that once filled me. Now it felt distant, almost unrecognizable. Nonetheless, a small spark remained inside, a reminder of my past dreams. Little did Derek know, this nightmare would soon turn to his. Life after the wedding was a blur of elaborate galas, high-stakes business meetings, and a ceaseless need to maintain appearances. Derek's charming facade began to slip away, revealing a colder, more controlling side. The man who once promised to conquer the world with me now seemed intent on conquering me. One evening, I was in the kitchen, trying to prepare dinner. Derek walked in, surveying the scene with his usual air of superiority. "That's what you're making, again?" His tone was dripping with disdain. I looked up, my hands trembling slightly. "Yes, Derek, you liked it last time." "Liked it?" he scoffed. "I tolerated it. You should know the difference by now." I bit my lip and turned back to the cutting board, my heart sinking. As I continued chopping, I could feel his eyes boring into me. He loved making me feel small, insignificant. "You never get it right, do you?" he snapped, knocking over a bowl of vegetables. "It shouldn't be this hard? Are you even trying?" His words stung, but I kept my head down. Any response would only fuel his anger. Days turned into weeks, and Derek's behavior worsened. He scrutinized everything I did, finding fault in even the smallest details. When I suggested we see a counselor, he laughed in my face. "Therapy? That's for weak people, Emma. We don't need some stranger meddling in our business." But deep down, I knew it wasn't our business. It was his. His control over every aspect of our life became more apparent with each passing day. One night, I decided to confront him. "Derek, we need to talk," I said as he walked in from yet another late night at the office. "About what?" he asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "About us. About how things have changed." He threw his jacket onto a chair, loosening his tie. "Changed? How exactly?" "You're different. We're different. You're always angry, always criticizing me. This isn't what I signed up for." Derek's eyes darkened. "Maybe you need to change your expectations. Marriage isn't some fairy tale, Emma. It's work." "I know that," I countered, my voice wavering, "but it shouldn't be like this. We shouldn't be like this." He crossed the room in swift strides, stopping inches away from me. "Listen, and listen well. You don't get to decide how this marriage works. I do. You think you have any real say here? You're wrong." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "This isn't love, Derek," he sneered, his lips curling in contempt. Love is a concept for the naive and the weak. Grow up, Emma. Weeks later, concerned after hearing about Derek's temper during the holidays, my parents called. Sweetie, are you sure you're okay? Mom's voice held a note of worry. I'm fine, really, I lied, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Derek wasn't around. Just busy with life here. Emma, you know you can always come home, Dad added softly. I know, Dad, but this is my home now. My words felt hollow, even to my own ears. As Derek's control tightened, my resolve grew stronger. I began to see the man I loved for who he really was, a master manipulator consumed by his own ego. My initial efforts to fix our marriage became a desperate scramble for survival. Collecting bits of evidence on Derek's unethical business practices became my new focus. I started documenting everything, keeping detailed records of his deals and transactions. It was a small rebellion, a secret act of defiance. Each note, each email saved, was a step closer to my freedom. Every day was another opportunity to observe, to gather more clues about his crooked activities. If Derek was going to keep me in this golden cage, I would use it against him. This nightmare had to end, and I was determined to break free. Derek's financial downfall began slowly, like the rumble of a distant storm. At first, it was subtle. Muted phone calls, late nights at the office. But soon the cracks in his empire grew too large to ignore. Derek, why are these bills late? I asked one evening, shuffling through a stack of past-due notices. He glanced at me, irritation evident. It's nothing, just a temporary setback. A setback? I held up the red envelopes. This is a bit more than that. He snatched the papers from my hand. I said I have it under control. Don't you trust me? His words were laced with anger, but also a hint of desperation. I could see the strain in his eyes, the cracks in his confidence. Of course, I trust you, I lied, choosing my words carefully. I just worry sometimes. Worry about yourself, he snapped. I don't need you poking around in my business. But it was clear Derek was no longer the unstoppable force he once seemed. His businesses began to crumble, and he became increasingly erratic. One night, he came home, a shadow of the man I once knew. His clothes were rumpled, his face drawn. They're pulling out, he muttered to himself, pacing the room. Who is? I asked cautiously. My investors, he spat. Bunch of cowards. Derek, maybe there's something we can do. Maybe if we... Stop, he yelled, throwing a glass against the wall. Just stop. You wouldn't understand. This is bigger than you, bigger than us. I flinched at his outburst, but held my ground. We're in this together, remember? His eyes narrowed. Together? Now you care about together? You think you can help? You're just as useless here as you are everywhere else. His words cut deep, but they only strengthened my resolve. Derek wasn't just drowning, he was dragging me down with him. One evening, as Derek stumbled through another business call, a plan began to take shape. If I could gather enough evidence of his underhanded deals, I could tear down his empire and build a case against him. I started reaching out to people, old friends, former employees, anyone that might help me understand the depth of his deceit. Lydia Green? I said hesitantly into my phone. It had taken me weeks to get a hold of her. Yes, who is this? Her voice was guarded. Emma Larson. We met a few times when you worked for Derek. I need to talk to you about... everything. There was a pause. Why should I help you? Because I know he wronged you too, I said, my voice steady. And because you deserve to see him fall. Lydia hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. When we met, Lydia was a wealth of information. Derek has been using company funds for his private ventures, she revealed, shaking her head. He's been hiding it from the board for years. Her eyes flashed with anger. He's ruined lives, Emma, but people are afraid to stand up to him. Not anymore, I said firmly. We gather the evidence, document everything. We bring him down together. The plan was formidable, but my resolve was unwavering. If Derek could manipulate his way to the top, I could surely expose the truth. The next step was to find more allies, people who would help me build the case against him. As I walked away from the meeting with Lydia, a sense of determination washed over me. Derek's empire, built on lies and manipulation, was about to crumble, and I would be the one to watch it fall. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Derek was ruthless, and I would need to be careful. But each step forward was a step toward my freedom, and no matter how tight Derek's grip, I was getting ready to break free. The fight had only just begun. The days that followed my meeting with Lydia were intense. Every moment alone was dedicated to piecing together Derek's downfall. I pored over documents, combed through emails, and spoke with more of his disgruntled employees. One name came up repeatedly: Jake Mathers, Derek's biggest competitor. Meeting Jake for the first time was daunting. We arranged to meet at a small, discreet cafe, neutral territory for both of us. As I walked in, he was already seated, sipping a coffee. He stood up when he saw me, offering a firm handshake. "Emma Larson," he said with a nod. "I've heard a lot about you." "Jake Mathers," I replied, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." He gestured for me to sit. "Let's get straight to it. Lydia mentioned you have some dirt on Derek." I nodded, opening my bag and pulling out a thick folder. "He's been cooking the books, funneling company funds into private ventures, among other things." Jake's eyes widened as he flipped through the evidence. "This is significant. Why are you doing this? I thought you were his loyal wife." I took a deep breath. I was once. But I can't ignore what he's become. He's controlling, manipulative, and he's hurt too many people, including me. Jake closed the folder and looked at me intently. "You want to take him down, and you need my help." "Exactly," I replied. "You have the business acumen and the resources. We can expose him together." "All right," Jake said after a moment, leaning back in his chair. "But know this, if we do this, there's no turning back." "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't ready," I asserted. Jake and I began meeting regularly, forming a strategy. We collected testimonies from former employees, built a case with forensic accountants, and crafted a plan that left no room for Derek to weasel out. Back at home, maintaining a facade of normalcy was painful. Derek's temper flared more frequently as his businesses crumbled. One night, he came home drunk and belligerent. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" he slurred, pointing a shaky finger at me. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "What are you talking about, Derek?" "Spending so much time out, meeting people. Don't think I haven't noticed." He staggered closer, his eyes bloodshot. "I know you're trying to betray me." I swallowed hard, staring down. "Stop being paranoid, Derek. I'm just trying to help." "Help?" He laughed darkly. "You can't even help yourself." His words were a cruel reminder of my supposed powerlessness, but I refused to let him see my fear. "Maybe if you weren't so busy destroying everything, we wouldn't be in this mess." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "Careful, Emma. You're treading dangerous waters." That night, I hid the folder with damning evidence in a secure place. It was a risk, having it so close, but it was also a reminder of my mission. I wouldn't let fear deter me. Derek's empire was shaky, and with Jake's help, it would soon crumble. The next morning, I met Lydia in a park, away from prying eyes. "How's the plan coming?" I asked as I handed her a coffee. She sipped gratefully and nodded. "Jake's all in. He's already leaked bits to the media. Derek's struggling to keep a lid on it." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Good. The more pressure, the better. "We need to be ready, though," Lydia warned. "Derek won't go down without a fight." "I'm ready," I said, my voice unwavering. As I walked away from the park that day, I knew we were close. Each step brought us nearer to the moment when Derek would finally face the consequences of his actions. The stakes were high and the danger real, but I was prepared to see it through. For too long, Derek had controlled my life. Now, it was time to reclaim it and watch him fall. The tension in the house was suffocating. Derek's paranoia reached new heights with each passing day. He was convinced that enemies surrounded him, but he never suspected the biggest threat was right under his nose. One evening, I received a text from Jake. "Ready for tomorrow?" I typed back quickly, "Yes." The plan was set in motion. Tomorrow, we would expose Derek at a critical board meeting. I just had to survive the night. Derek was at his desk, a scowl etched on his face. Papers were strewn about, and the air was thick with his frustration. "Damn it!" he shouted, slamming a file shut. I approached cautiously. "Anything I can help with?" He looked up, eyes burning with anger. "Unless you can make $500,000 appear out of thin air, no?" I stayed silent. Offering advice would only enrage him further. I retreated to the kitchen, my heart pounding with anticipation. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a professional outfit that exuded confidence. I needed every ounce of strength for what lay ahead. Derek eyed me suspiciously as I grabbed my bag. "Why so dressed up?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "Board meeting," I replied simply. I thought I'd look the part. He grunted, not entirely convinced, but too preoccupied to dig further. I left the house, trying to keep my breath steady. Jake met me in the lobby of Derek's company building. "You ready?" he asked, his face serious. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, my voice steady despite the nerves roiling inside me. We walked into the boardroom together. The room was filled with powerful men and women, all waiting for Derek. Moments later, Derek barged in, oozing his usual arrogance but with a hint of desperation lurking beneath. "All right, let's get started," he commanded, dropping into his seat at the head of the table. The meeting unfolded. Derek laid out his usual bravado, attempting to mask the deteriorating state of his empire. But the murmurs and discontent were barely concealed among the board members. Jake stood up, interrupting Derek. "Before we move forward, there's something critical we need to discuss." Derek's eyes narrowed. "And what would that be, Jake?" Jake glanced at me, then turned to the rest of the board. "Derek has been hiding significant financial discrepancies. We have concrete proof." Derek laughed, a hollow sound. "Dad, this is absurd. Just another attempt by a rival to discredit me." I stood up, my hands slightly trembling, but my voice firm. "It's not absurd, Derek. It's the truth, and we have the documents to prove it." I handed out copies of our evidence: false transactions, misappropriations, and unauthorized deals. The room erupted into chaos, voices shouting over each other. Derek's face went pale, then red with fury. "You traitorous bitch!" he screamed, lunging toward me. Two board members restrained him as I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake raised his voice above the din. "The evidence speaks for itself. Derek has not only jeopardized this company, but also the livelihoods of everyone involved. It's time to vote on his removal." Derek struggled against the hands holding him back, his eyes filled with rage. "You think you can do this to me? You think you'll win?" The vote was swift and decisive. The board members, tired of Derek's tyranny, chose unanimously to oust him. As they escorted him out, his threats echoed through the hallway. "You haven't seen the last of me, Emma. I'll destroy you." But his words fell on deaf ears. I knew that this was just the beginning of his downfall. Jake approached me, a satisfied smile on his face. "You did it, Emma. We did it." I nodded, the weight of what we'd just accomplished settling in. "Thanks to you and everyone who believed in bringing him down." As I walked away from the building, a sense of liberation washed over me. Derek's empire was crumbling, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The journey wasn't over. Derek would try to strike back, but I was ready. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to let it go. The wind had shifted, and this time it was in my favor. The aftermath of Derek's ousting was a whirlwind. News spread quickly, and his once loyal supporters jumped ship. It was like watching a dam break. All the lies and manipulations he'd built over the years came crashing down. Derek didn't take it quietly. He stormed into our house that night, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You think this is over?" he bellowed, slamming the door behind him. I stood my ground, calm but alert. "It is over, Derek. You've lost." He moved closer, his face twisted in anger. "You think you're tough now, huh? Think you can just ruin me and walk away?" "I'm not the one who ruined you," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You did that to yourself." With a snarl, he grabbed my arm, yanking me toward him. "You don't know who you're messing with. I will destroy everything you have." I met his eyes, unflinching. "You already tried, and you failed. It's time to let go, Derek." His grip tightened painfully before he shoved me away. "You'll regret this," he hissed, storming out again. The following days were tense, as Derek tried to cling to the remnants of his power. But every attempt to salvage his reputation was met with resistance. The evidence we'd revealed was too damning, and the board refused to reinstate him. Legal actions were looming over him like a dark cloud. In the meantime, Jake and I worked tirelessly to ensure that the transition of power was smooth. We spent long hours at the office, reviewing contracts, meeting with stakeholders, and planning the company's future. "You did an incredible job," Jake said one night after a particularly grueling day. "Thanks," I replied, exhaustion evident in my voice. "It's been worth it, though." He smiled, his admiration clear. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Emma." Those words stuck with me as I navigated through the chaos. With Derek out of the way, I started to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment downtown and moved out of the mansion that once felt like a prison. Jake and Lydia became more than just allies, they were friends. Lydia was a constant source of support, and Jake's presence was a grounding force. One evening, as we wrapped up another meeting, Jake looked at me thoughtfully. "You should come by the new office," he offered. "See the changes we're making." "I'd like that," I agreed, feeling a sense of closure as I looked ahead. Derek's threats didn't disappear completely. He made a few desperate attempts to contact me, but I never responded. Legal proceedings took their toll on him, and he slowly faded from public view. His fall from grace was complete. In my new apartment, I began to plan my next steps. Freedom felt strange, yet exhilarating. I pursued business ventures that I had put on hold for years, reconnecting with my passions. One afternoon, while setting up my new home office, I received a message from an unknown number. The words were simple. "He's hit rock bottom." I stared at the screen, the finality of it sinking in. Derek was done. There was no satisfaction in his suffering, only a sense of finality. I chose not to reply, deleting the message instead. Reflecting on everything, I realized that revenge hadn't been my true goal. It was freedom, pure and simple, the power to live my life without fear and to pursue my dreams without restraint. I called my mother, eager to share the news. "Mom, it's over. Derek's done." There was a pause before her voice, filled with relief, responded. "I'm so proud of you, Emma. You've come such a long way." "I have," I agreed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "And I'm just getting started." As I hung up, I looked around my new home, feeling a sense of peace. This was my space, my life, my future, and I was ready to embrace it with every ounce of strength I had found within myself. The fight was over, but the journey had just begun. Setting up my new business felt like planting a garden after a long winter. The seeds of my ideas, once dormant, were now bursting with potential. With the help of Jake and Lydia, I rented a small office space and began assembling a team. The air buzzed with excitement and purpose. One evening, I was settling into my new place when Jake dropped by. He handed me a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," he said, popping the cork. We clinked glasses, the bubbles sparkling in the dim light. "To new beginnings," I echoed, savoring the taste of freedom. Lydia came in, carrying a stack of papers. "We've got the final contracts for the new client," she announced. "This is huge, Emma." I looked over the documents, disbelief mingling with pride. "Unbelievable. We're really doing this." "Yes, we are," Jake said, his voice full of conviction. "You're driving this ship now. How does it feel?" "Terrifying and thrilling," I admitted, but in the best way possible. Our company launch was a modest event, held in the very office where I had planned Derek's downfall. It seemed fitting. Friends, clients, and family gathered, filling the space with laughter and chatter. Jake raised his glass. "Here's to Emma, for her courage and vision. May this venture be everything she's dreamed of and more." Cheers erupted, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This wouldn't be possible without your support." After the event, I found a quiet moment on the terrace, looking out over the city that had once seemed so intimidating. Lydia joined me, a smile playing on her lips. "Thought you might need a breather," she said, leaning on the railing. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in," I confessed. "You did it, Emma. You faced your demons and came out stronger." "I couldn't have done it without you and Jake." "Speaking of Derek," she said, her tone shifting. "Did you hear? He's filed for bankruptcy." I nodded. "I saw the news. It's surreal." "Does it bother you?" she asked, eyes searching mine. "No," I replied slowly. "It doesn't. He made his choices, and now he's dealing with the consequences." Lydia's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. "Looks like Jake's causing a commotion inside again. I better go check on him." We shared a laugh as she went back inside. Alone again, I let the silence wash over me. I had come full circle, from a lost and controlled woman to someone who had regained power and purpose. A few days later, as I was going through some old boxes, I found a note from Derek. It was from the early days, filled with promises of forever. I read it one last time and then tore it up, letting the pieces fall into the trash. Just as I was about to leave the office that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated but answered it. "Emma?" The voice was weak, strained. "Yes, who is this?" "It's Derek." My heart skipped a beat. What do you want, Derek? I need help, he stammered. I have nowhere left to turn. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of pity and resolve. Derek, I can't help you. You need to find a way to help yourself. There was a long pause. Please, Emma, just hear me out. I've heard enough, I said firmly. Goodbye, Derek. I hung up, feeling a sense of closure. The following day, I finalized plans for our new project, excitement bubbling within me. Jake and Lydia joined me in the office, their energy infectious. Ready to take over the world? Jake joked. Absolutely, I replied, confident and sure. As we gathered around the table to strategize, I knew this was just the beginning. I had faced my past and forged a future filled with promise. The unseen chains that once bound me were finally broken, and there was nothing holding me back anymore. The sun set behind the city skyline, casting a warm glow over our plans and dreams. Together, we were unstoppable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.
The first thing I noticed when I opened my front door wasn't the overturned furniture or the scattered papers. It was the silence, that heavy, unnatural quiet that wraps around you like a burial shroud, whispering that something is terribly wrong. I'm Audrey, and I just spent 3 days at a corporate retreat, learning how to trust my colleagues through ridiculous team-building exercises. Now I'm standing in my ransacked living room, realizing I should have been more concerned about trusting my own family. My fingers trembled as I dialed Ryan's number. 1 ring, 2 rings, the familiar click of voicemail. Of course, my dear husband was probably at his mother's house, pretending not to know why his wife was calling. Ryan, someone broke into the house. The safe is open. Call me back immediately. I walked through the debris of my violated home, cataloging the damage. Photo frames face down, drawers pulled out and emptied, couch cushions slashed open. But they hadn't been looking for money or jewelry. No, this was personal. They went straight for what mattered most. My grandmother's letters, the only pieces I had left of her. My phone buzzed. Not Ryan. Evan from work. How was the drive back? He asked. Someone broke into my house. My voice cracked. The safe. They knew the combination, Evan. Jesus, are you okay? Do you need me to come over? No, I know exactly who did this. I kicked aside a torn magazine. Helen's fingerprints are all over this mess. She's been trying to get those letters for months. Your mother-in-law. Why would she? Because she can't stand that Ryan married someone who won't bow to her every whim. I reached the kitchen, where even the cabinets had been emptied. She thinks those letters prove my grandmother's family wronged hers decades ago. Some ancient real estate dispute she won't let die. Call the police, Evan said. And tell them what? That my mother-in-law used a key my husband probably gave her to steal family documents. That my sister-in-law probably helped because she's bitter about her divorce and wants to hurt someone else's marriage. I laughed, but it came out hollow. They're too smart for that. They'll say Ryan gave them permission. It'll be my word against the entire Miller family. The basement door stood open. I hadn't checked down there yet. I have to go, Evan. I need to see what else they took. Audrey, wait. I hung up and descended the stairs, each step creaking under my feet. The basement light flickered on, revealing more chaos. But something caught my eye. A small piece of paper trapped under a fallen box. I pulled it free. It was a receipt from the hardware store 3 days ago for a duplicate key. My phone buzzed again. Ryan. Where are you? I asked before he could speak. At Mom's. Listen, Audrey, I can explain. Did you give her a key? Silence. Then, she said she just wanted to look for some old family photos while you were away. I didn't think. You never do think when it comes to her, do you? I crushed the receipt in my fist. Those letters were all I had left of my grandmother, Ryan, the only things that were truly mine. We can talk about this when I get home. No. The word came out sharp enough to cut. We'll talk about this in front of everyone. I'm coming over there right now. And Ryan, tell your mother to prepare for war. I ended the call and stood in my destroyed basement, surrounded by the wreckage of trust. They thought they could break me, make me submit to their control, like everyone else in their lives. But they had no idea what they'd just started. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who strikes first. It's the one who knows how to strike back harder. Helen's pristine living room made my skin crawl. Everything perfectly arranged, not a cushion out of place, while my house lay in ruins across town. The family photos on her walls told their own story. Ryan and Chloe's childhood moments, carefully curated to show Helen's version of reality. Not a single picture of my wedding day among them. I have no idea what you're talking about. Helen's voice dripped honey-sweet poison as she poured tea into delicate cups. Ryan gave me permission to look for old family albums while you were away. Nothing more. Chloe sat beside her mother, arms crossed, wedding ring conspicuously absent. You're being hysterical, Audrey, as usual. I placed the hardware store receipt on the coffee table. Funny how you needed a new key made 3 days ago. Planning ahead? Ryan shifted in his seat, eyes darting between his mother and me. Maybe we should all calm down. Oh, we're very calm, I said, watching Helen's perfectly manicured fingers tighten around her teacup. Just like we were calm last Christmas when you went through my phone while I was sleeping. Or last month when you showed up unannounced at my office to check on me. I worry about my son, Helen said. Someone needs to look out for his interests. His interests. My laugh felt like broken glass in my throat. Or yours. Mother was right about you from the start. Chloe leaned forward, eyes gleaming. You never understood our family, always keeping secrets, hiding things in that safe of yours. Those letters belong to my grandmother. Letters that prove your family cheated ours 60 years ago. Helen's mask cracked. That property should have been ours. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she... Mother. Ryan's warning came too late. I stood slowly, pieces clicking into place. So you admit you took them? Helen's face smoothed over instantly. I admitted nothing. And you have no proof. You're right. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the record button. But I will. Ryan, are you coming home or staying here? He looked at his mother, then at me. Always torn, always choosing the path of least resistance. I think maybe we all need space to cool off. Wrong answer. I headed for the door, pausing to look back at Helen. You know what's funny? Those letters you stole? They're not even the originals. Just copies I kept as decoys. Grandmother taught me well. Always keep what matters most where manipulative people can't reach it. Helen's teacup clattered against its saucer. You're lying. Am I? Guess you'll have to wonder about that, along with what else I might have hidden away. I met Ryan's eyes. Don't bother coming home tonight, or maybe ever. Audrey, wait. He started to rise, but Chloe grabbed his arm. Let her go, she said. She's just trying to manipulate you, like always. I closed the door on Helen's perfectly ordered world and walked to my car. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but not from fear. The originals were safe, just as I'd said, locked away in a safety deposit box since the day I married Ryan, and saw the hunger in Helen's eyes when grandmother's letters were mentioned at the wedding. My phone buzzed. Evan again. How bad was it? He asked. They took the bait. Helen practically confessed. I started the engine. But I need your help with something else. Remember that security system you installed at your lake house? The one with the hidden cameras. Yeah, why? Because I'm done playing defense. They want to go through my things? Let's make sure we catch them in the act next time. I pulled away from Helen's house, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. And Evan, thank you for being the one person in my life who actually listens. Always. But Audrey, just be careful. People like that, they're most dangerous when they're cornered. I ended the call, mind already racing with plans. Helen thought she knew everything about me, had me all figured out. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd spent 3 years watching her manipulate everyone around her. I'd learned from the best, and now it was time to put those lessons to use. The coffee shop across from Helen's favorite salon wasn't my usual spot, but it gave me a perfect view. I'd been watching for 2 hours when Evan slid into the seat across from me, pushing a fresh cup toward my hands. The cameras are set up, he said. motion sensors, night vision, everything feeding directly to your phone. But are you sure about this? I nodded toward the salon's window, where Helen and Chloe sat getting their weekly manicures. Listen. I pressed play on my phone, their voices crystal clear through the bug I'd planted in Helen's purse during our confrontation. We need those original letters, Helen was saying. That safety deposit box has to be at her bank downtown. Ryan says she's been going through their financial records, Chloe replied, probably planning to divorce him and take everything. Over my dead body, I didn't spend 30 years building this family's reputation to have her destroy it. We're going back to the house tomorrow while she's at work. There has to be something we can use against her. I stopped the recording. Still think I'm paranoid? Evan's face hardened. We should take this to the police. And tell them what? That my mother-in-law is planning to rob me. They'll say it's a family matter. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. Besides, I want more than just stopping them. I want them to face consequences for once in their privileged lives. My phone buzzed, Ryan calling again. Third time today. I declined it. He's been sleeping at their house, I said. Probably plotting with them, trying to figure out where the originals are. Or maybe he's worried about you. Then he should have worried before giving them a key to our house. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth before choosing them over me. Again. A text from Ryan. Please come home. We need to talk. Home, I muttered. Like that means anything anymore. Evan leaned forward. Audrey, I know you're hurt, but the salon door chimed. Helen and Chloe emerged, fresh manicures gleaming. They headed toward Helen's Mercedes, but Helen paused, looking directly at the coffee shop window. I didn't move, couldn't breathe. Her lips curved into that knowing smile I'd grown to hate. She knew I was watching. Time to go, I said, standing abruptly. They'll be at my house tomorrow at 10, according to their usual schedule. That's when we'll catch them. We, Evan raised an eyebrow. I thought you wanted to handle this yourself. I did, I do, but I gathered my things, hands shaking slightly. I can't face them alone anymore. I need someone in my corner. Always. He touched my arm gently. Just promise me something. Don't let revenge consume you. I've seen what it does to people. I watched Helen's car pull away, remembering the day she'd first shown her true colors. Our wedding reception, when she'd cornered me in the bathroom. You'll never be good enough for this family, she'd said. One day, Ryan will realize that. This isn't about revenge, I told Evan. It's about justice, and maybe saving Ryan from them, even if he doesn't want to be saved. My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my blood freeze. Found something interesting in your grandmother's old law firm records. Tomorrow noon, Riverside Park. Come alone, or Ryan learns everything about the Anderson case. Evan noticed my expression. What's wrong? I closed the message, mind racing. The Anderson case, my grandmother's biggest regret. The secret she'd taken to her grave. The real reason Helen hated our family. Nothing, I lied, forcing a smile. Just work stuff. I should go prepare for tomorrow. But as I walked to my car, Helen's words from 3 years ago echoed in my head. One day Ryan will realize that. Maybe she was right. Maybe tomorrow he would. And maybe it was time he did. Riverside Park looked different at noon. Colder somehow. I sat on a bench, clutching a manila envelope. Ammunition for whatever game Helen was playing. The Anderson case, files my grandmother had sealed away decades ago. Now a weapon in my hands. A shadow fell across my lap. Not Helen. Ryan? My voice cracked. What are you? Mother told me everything. He sat beside me, leaving careful space between us. About the Anderson case. About what your grandmother did to our family. The envelope felt heavier. Did she tell you how your grandfather tried to blackmail mine? How he threatened to destroy their law firm unless they gave him that property? That's not... He stopped, rubbing his face. She said you'd try to twist things. Like she twisted you. I turned to face him. When did you give her the safe combination, Ryan? His silence was answer enough. The day after our wedding, I continued. When she convinced you I was hiding something. That's why you've been checking our bank statements, right? Looking for evidence I'm stealing from you? I was protecting our family. Our family. The laugh that escaped me didn't sound like my voice. There is no our family. There's only ever been yours. My phone buzzed. Evan texting about the cameras he'd installed. Everything was ready for tomorrow's trap. But suddenly, it all felt hollow. She's using you, I said softly. She always has. And you let her because it's easier than standing up to her. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I stood, dropping the envelope in his lap. Here, the precious Anderson case files. Proof that your grandfather was the one who committed fraud, not mine. Proof that your mother's been lying all these years. He stared at the envelope. How did you get them? From my grandmother's old partner. Turns out he's been waiting years for someone to finally expose the truth. I stepped back. But you know what? Keep them. Burn them. Give them to Helen. I don't care anymore. Audrey, wait. I filed for divorce yesterday. The words hung between us like shattered glass. Ryan's face went pale. You what? Check your email. The papers should arrive today. My hands were steady now. I'm done being the villain in Helen's story. Done watching you choose them over me. Done pretending we have a marriage worth saving. He stood, reaching for me. We can fix this. I'll talk to Mother. That's exactly the problem. I moved away from his touch. Your first instinct is still to run to her. It always will be. My phone buzzed again. Helen this time. Where are you? We had a deal. I typed back. Deals changed. Ask Ryan about the files. You can't just throw away 3 years of marriage, Ryan said. You already did that when you gave them the key to our house. I started walking away, then paused. You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought I could save you from them, but you don't want to be saved. Audrey. Goodbye, Ryan. I walked through the park, past the spot where he proposed, past the bench where we used to have Sunday picnics. My phone kept buzzing. Helen, Ryan, even Chloe. I silenced them all. Only Evan's message got through. Cameras are live. You still want to go through with tomorrow's plan? I stopped at the park exit, looking back one last time. Ryan stood where I'd left him, envelope clutched in his hands, looking lost. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the ransacked house, the violated safe, 3 years of subtle manipulation and gaslighting. Yes, I texted back, but change of plans. I don't just want to catch them in the act anymore. What do you want? I watched Ryan pull out his phone, probably calling Helen, always running back to Mother. I want to destroy them, I typed, all of them. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn everything to the ground and start over. The security camera feed flickered on my laptop screen as I sat in my car across the street. 10 minutes until Helen's usual Thursday morning intrusion. Evan's sophisticated setup captured every angle of my house. Front door, back door, even the garden path Helen loved to criticize. You don't have to watch this, Evan said from the passenger seat. We can just let the cameras record. I need to see it. My knuckles whitened around my coffee cup. Need to know exactly how they do it. Right on schedule, Helen's Mercedes glided to a stop in front of my house. She stepped out, perfectly coiffed as always, followed by Chloe. But then a third door opened. Ryan. The coffee cup crumpled in my grip. He's helping them. They approached the front door, Ryan glancing nervously over his shoulder. Helen said something, gesturing impatiently. He pulled out a key, not the copy, but his original. Jesus, Evan muttered. Audrey, maybe we should… Wait, I grabbed his arm as a fourth figure emerged from Helen's car. Who is that? The man in the expensive suit walked with authority, carrying a briefcase. He looked familiar somehow. That's James Morton, Evan said. Helen's lawyer. I've seen him at charity events. The group disappeared inside my house. I switched between camera views, watching them move through rooms with disturbing familiarity. Helen directed them like a general commanding troops. The study, she was saying, voice clear through the hidden microphones. Those Anderson files have to be here somewhere. Mother, she said she gave them to me, Ryan protested weakly. Copies, obviously. You think your wife would give up her only leverage? Search everything. I watched them tear through my home again, but this time was different. This time, I saw Ryan's hands shaking as he opened drawers, saw Chloe's satisfied smirk as she knocked books off shelves, saw Helen's mask slip when she thought no one was watching, revealing raw desperation beneath. The safe, Morton said suddenly. Did you check behind it? My breath caught. The wall safe had been a decoy. Everyone knew about it. But behind it, there's nothing back there, Ryan said quickly, too quickly. Helen's eyes narrowed. Move it. Mother, move it. I grabbed my phone, fingers hovering over 911. Behind that safe was a hidden compartment, installed by the previous owner. Inside were documents far more damaging than the Anderson case. Evidence of Helen's own financial misconduct, carefully gathered over 3 years of watching and waiting. Ryan stepped forward, then stopped. No. What did you say? Helen turned on him. I said no. His voice strengthened. This ends now. We're leaving. After everything I've done for you. Helen's calm cracked. That woman has poisoned you against your own family. That woman is my wife. Not anymore, Morton interrupted smoothly. The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You have no legal right to prevent us from... From what? I stepped into the doorway, phone recording everything. Breaking and entering. Destruction of property. Conspiracy. They froze like guilty children. Except Helen. She smiled that knowing smile. Perfect timing, dear. We were just discussing the Anderson case and other family matters. I can see that. I moved further into the room, Evan close behind. But you made one mistake, Helen. You got sloppy. Desperate. I don't know what you mean. The Anderson case was never about property fraud, was it? It was about covering up what really happened. What you did. Her smile slipped. You're confused. The real documents aren't behind that safe. They're already with the district attorney. I met Ryan's stunned gaze, along with proof that your mother embezzled millions from her own charity foundation. That's why she's so desperate to find evidence against my family. To protect herself. The room erupted in chaos. Helen lunged for her lawyer. Chloe started screaming. Ryan stood frozen between them all. But I kept my eyes on Helen, watching her perfect world crumble. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about letting them destroy themselves. And sometimes justice comes from simply telling the truth. The police lights painted my living room in alternating red and blue. Helen sat primly on the couch, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face as she spoke to the officers. I was just trying to protect my son, she sobbed. From her, she pointed at me, and I watched 3 years of careful planning crumble. Mrs. Miller was threatening our family, Morton added smoothly. We have evidence of her harassment, her obsession with destroying her mother-in-law's reputation. The break-in was merely an attempt to recover documents that rightfully belonged to the family. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, the recording of their intrusion now useless. They'd gotten ahead of me, turned it all around, just like Helen always did. That's not true, Ryan said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. Mother, stop. Just stop. Helen's tears vanished instantly. Ryan, dear, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. He stepped away from her, toward me, but I backed away. Too little, too late. The embezzlement accusations, they're true, aren't they? That's why you've been so desperate to destroy Audrey's family's reputation, to cover your tracks. Everything I did was for this family. Helen's mask shattered completely. That money secured your future, your sister's future, and she jabbed a finger at me, threatened to ruin everything. The officers exchanged glances. One spoke into his radio. Mrs. Helen Miller, we're going to need you to come down to the station. This is absurd. I'm the victim here. She turned to her lawyer. "Morton, do something." But Morton was already edging toward the door. "I think our professional relationship has concluded, Helen, given the circumstances." Everything happened quickly after that. Helen screaming as they led her away. Chloe following, wailing about family loyalty. Morton slipping out during the chaos. The evidence I'd gathered being collected, documented, tagged. Ryan stayed. "Audrey," he started. "Don't." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. "Just don't." "I didn't know about the charity money, about any of it, I swear. But you knew about the break-ins, the harassment, the lies." My voice cracked. "You chose them. Every single time, you chose them." "I can fix this." "Fix what?" I gestured at our destroyed home. "My grandmother's letters are still gone. Our marriage is over. Your mother's going to jail. What exactly can you fix?" Evan appeared in the doorway. "Audrey, the detective needs your statement." I moved to follow him, but Ryan caught my arm. "I love you," he said desperately. "Isn't that worth something?" I looked at his hand on my arm, remembering every touch, every promise, every moment I'd thought we were building something real. Then I remembered watching him help them break into our home, watching him choose his mother's lies over my truth one last time. "Love without trust isn't love," I said quietly. "It's just another form of control." I pulled away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of our life together. The detective waited with more questions, more forms, more procedures. Hours of explaining how I'd gathered evidence of Helen's embezzlement, how I'd documented her harassment, how I'd watched my marriage die slowly, under the weight of manipulation and lies. Later, alone in my car, I pulled out my grandmother's last letter. The real one, not the copy Helen had stolen. The one I'd kept close all these years. "Remember, dear heart," she'd written. "Sometimes winning means walking away. Sometimes the greatest victory is in refusing to play their game at all." My phone buzzed. Ryan again. I declined the call and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the doorway of what used to be our home, looking lost. For a moment, my heart ached. But as I drove away, I realized something. In trying to destroy Helen, I'd almost become her. Manipulative, obsessed with control, willing to sacrifice anything for victory. My grandmother had been right. The real win wasn't in bringing Helen down. It was in finally setting myself free. The courthouse hallway stretched endless and cold. I sat on a hard wooden bench, watching Helen's society friends whisper among themselves as they waited for her arraignment. 3 weeks since the break-in, and still they couldn't quite believe their charitable board president was facing embezzlement charges. Ryan appeared at the end of the hall, dark circles under his eyes. Chloe clung to his arm, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. I focused on my phone, pretending to read emails. "Audrey," his voice was closer than I expected. "Can we talk?" "The divorce papers are with your lawyer," I said without looking up. "Just sign them." "That's not," he sat beside me, too close. "Mother wants to make a deal." Now I looked at him. "A deal?" "She'll return your grandmother's letters, all of them, if you drop the charges." A laugh bubbled up, bitter as coffee grounds. "You really don't get it, do you? She's still my mother. And that's all that matters, right?" I stood, needing distance. Even after everything she did, everything she stole, she made mistakes. Mistakes, my voice carried, making heads turn. She systematically destroyed our marriage, terrorized me in my own home, stole millions from her own charity. Those aren't mistakes, Ryan. They're choices. Helen's lawyer appeared, beckoning to Ryan. But before he could move, the courthouse doors burst open. Evan rushed in, clutching a manila envelope. "Got it," he said, breathing hard. "Found it in Morton's office." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single document, a letter from Helen to her lawyer, dated 3 years ago, the day before my wedding. "What is that?" Ryan asked. "Insurance," I said, scanning the contents. "In case I ever threatened her control over you." I looked up as Helen entered in handcuffs, flanked by officers. She planned this from the beginning. The harassment, the break-ins, everything. It was all calculated to make me look unstable, obsessed with the Anderson case. Helen's eyes locked onto the letter. For the first time, I saw real fear there. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "Your lawyer isn't as loyal as you thought." I held up the letter. "You documented everything, Helen. Every step of your plan to destroy me. And now everyone's going to know exactly who you are. You ungrateful little—" She lunged forward, but the officers held her back. "Mother, stop." Ryan moved between us. "Just stop." Helen's face crumpled. "Everything I did was for you. To protect you from her." "From what?" Ryan's voice cracked. "From being happy? From having a life outside your control. She never loved you like I do." "No," I interrupted. "I loved him enough to let him choose. You loved him enough to make sure he never could." The whispers around us grew louder. Helen's friends watched in horror as their perfect society matron shattered before their eyes. Chloe backed away from her mother, finally seeing the truth she'd helped enable. "The arraignment's starting," Evan said softly. I handed the letter to the district attorney, who'd been waiting quietly nearby. Then I turned to Ryan one last time. "I did love you," I said. "But love shouldn't hurt like this. Audrey, please." "Goodbye, Ryan." I walked away as Helen was led into the courtroom, her carefully constructed world collapsing behind me. My phone buzzed. A text from my grandmother's old law partner. "Found something in the archives," it read. "Your grandmother would be proud." Outside, the autumn air felt clean and sharp. Evan caught up with me at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "You okay?" he asked. I watched leaves scatter across the pavement, breaking free from their branches, carried away by the wind. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be. Because sometimes winning isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about refusing to let them destroy you. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply walking away, head held high, leaving them to face the consequences of their own choices." The last box from my old life sat unopened on my new apartment floor. Through the window, downtown lights glittered like scattered stars, so different from the suburban darkness I'd left behind. My phone lit up. Evan's text about Helen's sentencing. 5 years for embezzlement. The society pages were already buzzing with scandal. Her carefully crafted reputation shattered like a dropped teacup. A knock at the door made me freeze. I knew that pattern. 3 quick taps, 1 slow. Ryan stood in the hallway, holding a familiar leather-bound bundle. "Grandmother's letters," I said, throat tight. "Found them in Mother's study while cleaning out the house." He held them out like a peace offering. "They were always yours." I took the bundle, fingers tracing the worn edges. "How is she?" "Angry. Bitter." He shrugged. "Chloe's in therapy. Says she's starting to understand some things about our family." "And you?" "Learning to stand on my own." He glanced past me into the apartment. "You're painting." An easel stood by the window, canvas half covered in bold strokes of red and gold, something I discovered by accident, a way to pour out everything words couldn't express. "It helps," I said simply. "Audrey, I don't." I stepped back, creating distance. "We both know why it ended." "I know, He pulled out an envelope. The signed divorce papers. "And something else you should see." Inside was a newspaper clipping from 30 years ago. A small article about a young Helen Miller, before she married into money, desperately trying to prove herself worthy of high society. "She was always afraid," Ryan said quietly, "of losing control, of being exposed as not good enough. I'm not excusing what she did, but I understand it now. Understanding doesn't make it right. No, but it helps me not become her." A siren wailed somewhere in the city below. In my old life, I would have flinched at the noise. Now it felt like a reminder. Life goes on, changes, transforms. "I never wanted revenge," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I just wanted to be free." "I know, that's why you won." He turned to leave, then paused. "The painting, it's beautiful." After he left, I opened the bundle of letters. My grandmother's words flowed across the pages, telling stories of strength, of standing up to bullies, of choosing integrity over revenge. But one passage caught my eye, written just before she died. Remember, dear heart, some people will try to dim your light because they fear their own darkness. Your power lies not in fighting them, but in continuing to shine. I picked up my brush, adding touches of blue to the canvas. Not everything needed resolution. Not every story needed a neat ending. Sometimes victory wasn't in destroying your enemies or even forgiving them. Sometimes it was in discovering who you really were without them. My phone buzzed again, Evan inviting me to dinner. Not a date, not yet, but maybe someday. For now, friendship was enough. For now, I had my freedom, my truth, my art. The city lights flickered, casting shadows that danced across my canvas. In my old life, I would have seen threats in those shadows. Now I saw possibilities, patterns, stories waiting to be told. I picked up another brush. The night was young. The canvas was waiting. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free. Not because I'd won, not because Helen lost, but because I'd finally learned the difference between revenge and liberation. And in that difference, I found myself.
Marco's laugh echoed in my mind. You wouldn't last a day without me, Elena. That's when I decided our cozy suburban home would make a lovely, just-sold postcard to mail to his office. My name is Elena Vasquez, and life had a way of testing me. 5 years ago, I married Marco, a charming coworker with a sharp wit and an alluring smile. Fallen by a mutual passion for success, we became a power couple at the office, only to face our vulnerability at home. The dream of nurturing a family together began to crumble with each failed pregnancy test. The hallways of fertility clinics became painfully familiar as we exhausted options, drained emotions, and dwindled savings. By the time I felt the first flutters of life within me, I had weathered a storm of hormone injections and hope. It wasn't just one heartbeat echoing during the ultrasound. It was two. We named our miracles Gabriel and Sophia. Marco's initial elation at the news of twins soon faded into a distant interest. His involvement was sporadic at best, absent at most. Nights blurred with feedings and diaper changes, often solo endeavors, as Marco distanced himself, citing workplace exhaustion. My love for the twins was unbounded, but in the dark circles under my eyes and the ache in my bones, I knew this wasn't the partnership I'd signed up for. Gabriel and Sophia arrived early, fighters from the start. While they lay in the NICU, I laid plans for their future. But Marco, he was like an anchor, dragging my determination through the murky waters of doubt. I pledged to myself that our children would never feel the burden of their father's inattention, a vow heavy with consequence and courage. The first year of their life tested everything I knew about strength. As my body labored to recover, my resolve strained under the weight of Marco's apathy. Support. He called his occasional peeks into their nursery, peppering his absence with excuses and unfulfilled promises. The inequality of our roles grew, a chasm I could no longer bridge with love alone. Yet, the thought of leaving never gained momentum for long. My father had grown sick, the kind of illness that drains life in slow sips. With my mother having passed years before, he had nobody else. And as for me, with no job and savings devoured by IVF, I was tethered to Marco's erratic benevolence like a boat adrift, dependent on his mercies and whims. That day when the vase shattered against the floor, the water drenching my skin, I understood the capacity of our bond's fracture. But I had made a choice to ensure it would not break me. I mopped the floors, silenced the warning of desperation in my heart, and planned. Because all it takes is a moment for fate to align with fortitude, and that moment had come. I just had to reach out and grasp it tightly. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, casting long shadows across what was once a nursery, now a war zone of scattered toys and overturned furniture. Sophia's wails cut through the silence, a shrill reminder that today, like every other day, I would face alone. Gabriel, ever the explorer, had managed to find the one remaining family heirloom, a silver picture frame my grandmother had given me, and was using it as a chew toy. I wrestled it away, my heart sinking. The last piece of my past, the last bit of value I owned other than the roof over our heads, would soon have to be sold. The weight of that decision pulled at my chest, a physical ache that seemed to spread with each labored breath. As much as that frame was a symbol of my heritage, it was now a lifeline, a ticket to keep the lights on and the cupboards from growing bare. Marco, on the other hand, remained blissfully oblivious to the depth of our financial troubles. He had a knack for evading responsibility, an art form he had perfected over the years. I returned to the workforce not by choice but necessity, dropping the twins off at a daycare that drained an already sparse bank account. My absence from the office had made me a stranger in the world I used to dominate, my confidence replaced with apologies and hasty exits whenever the daycare would call about another fever or cough. My supervisors were understanding, yet their patience had limits I dared not test. Each sick day, each rush home felt like a twisted countdown to my professional demise. On one occasion, I mustered the courage to ask Marco for help, yet his excuses danced around any reasonable offer. "I can't. I have a meeting," he would say, or, "They're just kids. They get sick." The burden of solo parenting lay heavy on my shoulders, a mantle I wore out of love for my children, but it was wearing me thin. Resignation from my job was not a choice but a conclusion, the result of countless pressures culminating in a silent scream for reprieve. I confided in my father, whose frailty belied a fierce will. "Elena, my girl, you've borne more than anyone should," he whispered, drawing me close. His hands, once strong, now trembled against my back. "Let me take some of this weight." But how could I? His health teetered on a precarious edge, his life a finicky balance of medication and rest. Adding my burdens to his would be unforgivable. Yet, he insisted, adamant in his resolve. "Family lifts each other up," he said, his voice a feather yet heavy with conviction. "We'll find our way through this. Just you wait." My father's assurance was a balm, but it couldn't replace a paycheck. The guilt was a routine visitor, making itself at home within me as I saw the worry etch deeper into his face with every passing day. I was trapped, not by love or duty, but by necessity, a slave to the circumstances I couldn't escape. The silver frame sold to a faceless buyer for a soul-crushing sum, all too soon spent on necessities. As I slid the money over the counter for a week's worth of groceries, the reality of my situation seemed to sharpen into painful focus. I was at the end of my rope, the ends frayed and unwinding. It was time for the charade to end. It was time to fight back. Uneasy light filtered through the blinds, casting a dull glow over the toys strewn across the floor. The walls of our home, a place that once harbored the whispers of shared dreams, now stood silent, guarding the secret of my crumbling marriage. As Marco's shadow loomed large and menacing within our lives, my space for hope dwindled. His ire had no bounds, no line it wouldn't cross. His voice, once soft and filled with affection, now clenched with contempt. He was a tempest, his anger the crashing waves, and I, a ship made of glass, threatened to shatter with the smallest misstep. The day he hurled his cell phone across the room, narrowly missing Gabriel, who giggled, oblivious to the danger, was the day my tolerance reached its nadir. But there was a spark, faint and flickering, in the gloom. A ray of light began to slip through the shadows. My father. With his health improving and Grandma finally settled into a nursing facility, he was determined to shoulder part of my burden. His arrival marked the first breath of fresh air in a home that had grown stifling. "Lean on me, Elena," he urged, taking the twins in his arms with surprising dexterity for his age. "I'm not made of glass. Let me help you rebuild." And so, with the twins in safer hands, I set off to reclaim the life I had on hold. I reached out to Isabel, my former boss and mentor, who had risen through the ranks with a grace I had always admired. The call was the first step in executing the plan that had brewed in the recesses of my mind, our small act of defiance against Marco's tyranny. "Isabel, it's Elena. I'm thinking of returning to work," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Isabel's response was prompt, sympathetic to the point of painful. "I suspected as much," she confided, a hint of something more in her tone. "There's been something you should know about Marco. Can you come in tomorrow?" The next day, the old familiarity of the office wrapped around me like a well-worn glove as I sat across from Isabel. Despite our formal attire and the polished wood of the desk between us, the atmosphere was intimate, protectively confidential. "He's been unfaithful, Elena," Isabel divulged, cutting straight to the heart of a truth I had already sensed. "With a client's daughter. It's more than gossip. There are receipts, and, well, people have seen them together." The realization stung, a sickening confirmation of the distance between us, yet it was ammunition for what was to come. It propelled me forward, a catalyst for my resolve. I laid bare my intentions for divorce, my need for independence, and Isabel responded not just with support, but with action. She fast-tracked my return to the company, championing my cause with the vigor of a true ally. With every piece that fell into place, I saw the path before me clear, and with a surge of newfound courage I was ready to make move. The evening I set my plan in motion. The house felt larger, the silence louder. Outside, the sunset bled across the sky, a canvas of defiance. Inside, my father whispered stories to the twins as I packed their bags, preparing for the upheaval to come. Marco's business trip was a timely blessing, and with the ink still wet on my letter of resignation, I knew there would be no turning back this time. Every item packed away, every photograph removed from the walls, was a declaration. I was off to change the locks, hand over the house keys to the realtor, and finally step out of the prison Marco had unwittingly built around us. The following morning I left our now bare house, the echo of emptiness reverberating with each step I took. Walking into the office, my nerves buzzed undeniably. A mix of anxiety and adrenaline surged through me. The familiar sights and sounds of the workplace greeted me like old friends long missed. Isabel welcomed me with a warm, conspiratorial smile that did little to quell the flurry of butterflies in my stomach. "You're doing the right thing," Isabel reassured, her gaze steady, her words a solid anchor. "You're taking back control." Her office, once a place for career advice, now served as the backdrop to the unfolding drama of my personal life. Isabel closed the door with a decisive click, and without preamble, unveiled Marco's betrayal in somber detail. He had taken far more than his share of liberties. His affair with the daughter of one of our clients, not just an insult but a liability. It wasn't just our company's reputation at stake, but his professional future. Images of them together lurched at me from the fringes of my mind, yet the revelation steeled me. I wouldn't let his indiscretions be my undoing. "Thank you," I murmured, the weight of the situation settling around me like a cloak. "He won't get away with this." Isabel proceeded to lay out the groundwork for my return to work. As it turned out, they needed someone with my expertise and experience. "It's your second act, Elena," she said, her voice a blend of excitement and firm resolution. But the opportunities didn't end there. After discussing possible starts and positions, Isabel revealed another game-changing detail: a newly implemented on-site daycare, a solution to one of the many complicated puzzles of my life. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was finally bright enough to chase away the shadows that had settled in my heart. Armed with this fresh knowledge and a plan that grew bolder by the minute, I left Isabel's office poised for the impending confrontation. The empty house wasn't just a sign of a life shed. It was the first stone in the foundation of a new one. My father, God bless his resolute heart, backed me every step of the way. It was our secret, a quiet rebellion danced out in the signing of papers and whispers of change. The real estate agent, understanding the delicacy of the situation, had agreed to act quickly. As I met with the realtor, who was keen to capitalize on the property's prime location, I signed off on what was undeniably my most assertive act yet. The house was more mine than Marco's, purchased with my pre-marriage savings and therefore mine to sell. I reflected, not without a twinge of irony, how little Marco had cared for the old place, dismissing it as a temporary inconvenience while we climbed the corporate ladder. Yet now it would become the very instrument of my liberation. The plan was set into motion with a precision that would have impressed even my toughest critics at work. With the realtor's help, we moved swiftly, securing a buyer and moving my family into a comfortable rental. My father, with renewed vigor, was already making the space our own, filling it with laughter and plans for the future. As I lay in bed that evening, staring at the ceiling in the quiet before sleep, the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. I'd taken back my life, my children's future, and secured our escape. There was no turning back now. The glass doors of the office building seemed heavier than I remembered, but today they parted with the promise of new beginnings. A chorus of unfamiliar yet friendly faces welcomed me, the employees I would soon work alongside. With each step, I anchored myself in the reality of my fresh start. The cloak of anonymity I'd worn during my time away had been shed. I was Elena Vasquez, soon to be Elena Vasquez, single mother and respected professional. Marco, however, remained a storm cloud on the horizon of my newfound clarity. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar cadence of his voice echoing down the hallway as he approached. There was a frantic edge to it, a discordant note that betrayed his composure. His eyes found mine, widening with a mixture of shock and anger. "Where have you been? Where are the kids?" he demanded, his voice sharp, betraying his usual facade of control. Resisting the impulse to back away, I stood my ground. "They're safe," I replied evenly. "They're with my father." Marco's gaze darted around, taking in the faces of our colleagues who had formed an ad hoc audience to the unfolding drama. Isabel stepped forward, her presence a shield between the past and my future. "Welcome back, Elena," she declared with a smile, cutting through the tension. "We've all been looking forward to this day." The assembled coworkers erupted into applause, isolating Marco with their camaraderie. He seemed to shrink, a figure diminishing in the light of collective support. Confused yet defiant, he spluttered, "What is this about? Why didn't you tell me you were coming back?" Isabel, with the poise of someone used to handling delicate situations, responded, "Our company is a family, Marco, and when a member of our family is ready to return, we celebrate." A murmur of agreement hummed through the crowd. I watched as understanding dawned upon Marco's face, the implications of my return, the shattering of the narrative he had constructed for himself. "The daycare," he finally stammered. "The children, they must be." I cut him off, my voice steady, my resolve unwavering. "The children are well taken care of, and as for the daycare, we've been fortunate enough to secure spots for both Gabriel and Sophia." Isabel supplemented my words, addressing Marco. "Indeed, they'll be just fine here. We've made certain of that with our new facility." The room buzzed with whispers of commendation and encouragement as Marco realized the breadth of his miscalculation. He had assumed I'd crumble without him, that I'd be forced to compromise. But as the walls he built around me fell away, his own began to close in. "Let's discuss this privately," Marco hissed, reaching for my arm. Resisting his touch, I produced the single item that symbolized the end of our union, a business card from a divorce attorney. His eyes flickered with defeat as I announced, "Please divorce me, Marco." Gasps and whispers filled the room, and I watched as the mask of charm Marco had always worn dissolved into a frown of disbelief. He was silent, searching for words that wouldn't come. Each heartbeat in the silence felt like an eternity, but ultimately it was Isabel's voice that filled the void. "Marco, I think it's time you and the higher-ups had a conversation." Humiliation flared across Marco's face as he backed away, realizing his private indiscretions were far less private than he had believed. As the weight of his deeds crept upon him, he slumped his shoulders, defeated and exposed. I turned away, leaving the broken vase of our marriage behind, and with it the shards of our tarnished past. The flicker of twilight's last stand gave way to night's embrace, as I sat in the quiet comfort of our new rental home, the twins sound asleep in their freshly assembled beds. It was incredible how silence had once been my enemy, filled with the tension of waiting for Marco's critique or outburst. Yet here it was now, a peaceful testament to the change I had courageously enacted. My phone's insistent ringtone splintered the calm. Marco's name flashed on the screen, a vestige of the life I was steadily discarding. With a calming breath, I answered, bracing for the storm I knew I had stirred. "Elena, what have you done?" Marco's voice, barely intelligible between sobs and fury, crackled through the speaker. "I've started over, Marco, for myself and for our children," I replied, my voice a beacon in the tumult. He was in disbelief, reeling from the discovery of my actions, the sale of the house, the relocation of our family. The life he had taken for granted, dismantled, sold off to the highest bidder. My heart might have winced at his confusion once, but that empathy had dissolved with every disparaging remark, every angry shout, every tear shed in solitude because of him. "Our house, our home, it's empty. Where are Gabriel and Sophia and all our things?" He was frantic, grasping at the fragments of control that slipped through his fingers like fine sand. Calmness steadied my response. "It's all taken care of, Marco. The children are with my father, and our possessions are here with us in our new place." "You sold our house without my consent? Without even telling me?" His incredulity suggested betrayal, the irony stinging like salt in a wound. I did what was necessary, Marco. The house was mine before we married. I used my savings for the down payment, remember? I spoke the truth he could not refute, the reality he had ignored in favor of his self-centered narrative. The real estate agent worked with us to find a buyer. It's done. We are moving on. He struggled for words, lost in the labyrinth of his making. When they finally came, they were edged with despair. I thought we were going to discuss this, figure things out. There's nothing left to figure out. It's over, Marco. My finger hovered over the end call button, ready to sever the last of our ties. But where will I go? He pleaded, the mighty Marco reduced to echoes of vulnerability. That's for you to decide. Just know that Gabriel and Sophia will always be cared for, with or without you. The finality of my words seemed to drape over us, a curtain closing on the theater of our farce. I wasted no time after the call, swiftly blocking Marco's number, a line I never thought I'd cross. In the days that followed, legal motions unraveled the entanglements of our failed marriage. Custody, assets, child support. An avalanche of documents and signatures wiped clean the slate, giving rise to my long-awaited freedom. Rumors of his affair saw Marco ousted from his lofty perch, and without the shield of our company's prestige, he eventually resigned. Last I heard, his pride had surrendered to necessity, placing him in a humbler line of work. The whispers of his downfall weaved through the industry like a cautionary tale, a high price paid for hubris and betrayal. Before me lied the blank pages of our lives, ready to be filled with the tales of our choosing. A chapter closed, a book ended, and the narrative was mine to write anew. The morning sun painted hues of gold and amber across the sky, casting a warm glow over the breakfast table where Gabriel and Sophia munched on their cereal with eagerness which only children possess. The atmosphere was serene, a stark contrast to the vortex of recent events. As we sat around the table, my father, the twins, and I formed a new picture, a frame of family redefined by solidarity and love. Those early days of our new life felt like living in a dream, one where I half expected to wake to the sound of Marco's voice demanding an explanation, but that never happened. The twins adapted with the resilience of youth, and over time, peace became our new normal. The transition back into work was smooth, even liberating. Colleagues who had once pitied me now greeted me with respect. My input was once again valued, my insights sought after, and my presence acknowledged. Isabel had checked in often, ensuring that the integration was seamless and that I settled into the rhythm easily. The on-site daycare was a godsend, offering not just convenience but a level of care and attention that left me reassured during the workday. As the days eased into weeks and the weeks meshed into months, we settled into a comfortable routine. Life without Marco's overbearing presence transformed from an initial breath-holding suspense into a deep, gratifying exhale. The fear of his volatility and the anxiety over our future had dissolved into a renewed sense of purpose and independence. Catherine had been true to her word. The whole office seemed to rally around me. Some came by just to tell me how they admired my strength. Others gently shared their own stories of overcoming difficulties. The solidarity was unexpected but deeply appreciated. Even the higher-ups, who were initially guarded, offered their unofficial nods of approval and encouragement. Of course, there were challenges. The twins, with their boundless energy and ceaseless curiosity, ensured there was never a dull moment. The balance between work, motherhood, and personal growth was a delicate dance, but one I was determined to master. Every step I took with a clarity I had not felt in years. I took my father's advice to remain involved with the community to heart. Being active in local events, meeting neighbors, and contributing to the twins' daycare activities provided a sense of belonging. In the shared experiences of parenting and bits of leisurely chats by the playground, I found companionship and a thread of connection weaving into the fabric of our new lives. Gabriel and Sophia burgeoned in this new environment, their laughter a confirmation that leaving Marco had been the right decision. When they hugged me tightly with tiny arms that promised eternity, I knew we had a bright future ahead. All things considered, the upheaval had led to a life more vibrant and fulfilling than I dared to imagine when trapped beneath Marco's shadow. My parents had instilled in me the values of strength, optimism, and resilience, qualities I aimed to pass on to my children. Looking ahead, I saw more than just a flickering light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I saw brilliant sunshine painting our path forward. As I turned the key in the door of our new home, it was more than just an entranceway. It was a gateway to the promise of tomorrow. And with one last glance back at the road traveled and the traces of the struggle behind us, I stepped through with my head held high, ready for whatever awaited us on the other side.
I'm Amelia, about to turn 27 this year. I've been happily married for 5 years, and my son Martin just celebrated his 4th birthday. I used to work full-time after we got married, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband Brian is 33 years older than me. Brian's initial enthusiasm in our dating days was exciting, but after we got married, his behavior changed. He became more domineering. Brian has a 20-year-old sister named Jane, and their age difference seems to make Brian more indulgent with her. Before we were married, I didn't mind Jane's frequent visits. I assumed they had a close relationship. But after we tied the knot, I noticed Jane's behavior shift. She often drops by unannounced, expecting to be served without bringing anything to show her appreciation. Brian, instead of addressing this, expects me to cater to her demands. Jane treats me like I'm invisible, only speaking to Brian. Despite not preparing for an extra guest, I end up serving dinner to Jane. Brian, rather than understanding, blames me for not being more considerate. Even when Jane apologizes, it's clear she enjoys the preferential treatment Brian gives her. Left with leftovers, I make my own meal while Brian and Jane chat on the sofa, leaving the dining table a mess. They treat Martin and me more like hired help than family. One evening, as I'm about to bathe Martin, Brian interrupts loudly, demanding I buy a cake for Jane despite the late hour. Jane insists on having it right away, and Brian blames me for the delay. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly take Martin to the cake shop. Overhearing their conversation, I learn they're criticizing me and questioning why Brian married me. Martin, though too young to understand the words, senses the tension. I try to hide my frustration and ask him about his cake preference. He cheerfully requests one with lots of fruit. Our trip to the cake shop was filled with discussions about cakes, momentarily distracting me from Brian's harsh words. Martin and I arrived just before closing time. Fortunately, we found the cake Jane desired, so we purchased 2 cakes, including the fruit-loaded one Martin wanted. Back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Brian, then prepared Martin's cake and headed to the dining room. The moment I placed it in front of Martin, Jane pointed and expressed her desire for that cake. Before I could react, Brian moved Martin's chosen cake in front of Jane, disregarding Martin's protests. Brian justified his action, claiming he bought the cake with his earnings and had the right to choose for Martin. Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I voiced my dissatisfaction. In response, Brian threatened with divorce. Martin, who had stopped crying, anxiously held my hand and then, after some thought, said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries on it. Yes, it's really delicious." He mentioned this while eating the cake initially wanted by Jane. Feeling that Martin was enduring too much, I lifted his cake plate. When I saw Jane reaching for it, I took Martin to the next room so he could enjoy his cake in peace. Brian apologized to Jane, claiming he was sorry for being stingy. Despite wanting to retort, I held back for Martin's sake. Watching Martin innocently enjoy his cake was a heartwarming sight. After finishing the cake, we decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I discovered Jane had already left. As I prepared breakfast, I heard Martin crying. Shockingly, his piggy bank, a gift from my father, was broken and the saved money was gone. Martin, who always said goodnight to the piggy bank, was left heartbroken. When I questioned Brian about it, he casually mentioned that Jane needed some money, so she took it from the piggy bank. holding a crying and shaking Martin. I felt his pain so acutely that I cried with him. It was painful to witness Brian prioritizing and caring for his sister more than our son. Expressing my anger and sadness, I confronted Brian, breaking my usual silence on arguments in front of Martin. Brian, without a word, went to the bedroom and returned with something shocking in hand: divorce papers. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Brian had tucked away somewhere I didn't know. In a sudden burst, he confronted me, shoving the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud bang. Martin, who had never cried over the issues with Brian and Jane, seemed to have reached his limit, crying since last night. Unable to bear seeing Martin so hurt, I suggested skipping daycare for the day, and he happily agreed with a loud yes, showing a faint smile. We spent the day playing and bonding, with Martin bringing a picture book from the shelf, sitting on my lap, and happily remarking, "The teacher at the nursery today was Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed filled with patience, and I decided to make the day special by taking a day off from work. Despite causing potential trouble at my workplace, they kindly understood the situation and granted me a day off. In the morning, we visited the park, played hide and seek, and had fun in the sandbox and on the slide. When we returned home for lunch, Martin appeared sleepy, usually napping by himself, but today he fell asleep on my lap, like when he was a baby. Though I initially thought of doing household chores during his nap, I decided that today was special. Instead, I allowed myself to be healed by his peaceful sleeping face and gentle breathing. However, my serene moment was abruptly interrupted by a noise from the entrance, indicating the front door had opened. As it wasn't Brian's usual time to come home, I became suspicious and quickly hid in the bedroom closet, clutching Martin. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise, it was Jane. Trembling with fear, I listened as she searched for something, expressing frustration over not finding it. Jane then made a phone call, mentioning Brian and discussing their unsuccessful search. After hearing her lock the front door and leave, I put Martin to bed and contemplated the strange events. I couldn't comprehend why Jane had entered the house and what they were looking for. Suddenly, Brian seemed like a stranger, and I felt a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Swiftly packing essentials for Martin and myself, we headed to the station and took a train to my parents' house. Fortunately, their home was nearby, just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, my parents sensed something from my expression and welcomed us without asking questions. I shared the entire ordeal with them, including my fear of staying at our house due to Brian and Jane's actions. Upon hearing my mother's suggestion that Jane might have been looking for my belongings, possibly cash or cards, I recalled my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. I had entrusted the company to friends when I decided to prioritize raising my child after getting married. Although I still worked part-time and communicated with the company from home, Brian was unaware that I was still the CEO. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Brian had tucked away, suspecting that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. While I've mentioned to him that I still receive some assistance from the company, I've deliberately kept the details about being the CEO and my savings private. This secrecy stems from realizing early in our marriage that Brian struggles with managing money and tends to spend everything he earns. Kevin, at first, provided only $200 a month for food expenses and even suggested I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. However, with the financial strain of raising Martin and only $200 for food, I never agreed to be a full-time housewife. Eventually, he reluctantly allowed me to work part-time. To ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he had me sign a postmarital property waiver through a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I used my savings for his nursery fees and clothes. Since I've only received $200 for food, I've never asked Brian for additional funds beyond the food budget, leading him to believe I have savings. Considering Jane's apparent need for money and Brian's perception of my financial situation, they might be searching for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account dedicated to Martin with a portion of my salary directly deposited into it each month. Despite their search, they won't find the cash cards as I always carry my valuables. However, there's still an unsettling issue. Jane might be entering our house even when we're not there, and Brian may be allowing it. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables, including the cash cards, in my parents' safe. As I pondered their need for money, Martin approached my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the shattered promise of saving up. My father, angered by Martin's story, vowed to call Kevin. My mother suggested finding out their purpose calmly, as Brian's mention of divorce might shift blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him. To ascertain their purpose, I decided to record their conversation, consulting a lawyer who was a friend of my father's. Returning home, I began cooking dinner, keeping my phone screen down to record secretly. Brian arrived home, surprising me by immediately asking about my cash cards. When I questioned him, he gave vague answers, attempting to deceive me. When I remained silent, Brian grew agitated and demanded all my part-time money for his sister. Refusing, I explained it was for Martin's savings. In response, he angrily pushed the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for Martin. He even uttered words implying he valued Jane more than our son. Hearing this, I stopped preparing the meal, put the divorce papers in my bag, took Martin's hand, and headed for the door. Kevin, in a loud voice, declared his serious intent for divorce, instructing me never to come back. I responded by stating I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. After leaving, I received numerous messages and calls from Kevin, which I ignored. Turning off my phone, I sought refuge at my parents' house, sharing the recording and divorce papers with them. Although I confessed to having no love or affection for Kevin, I expressed concern for Martin. My parents advised me to do as I pleased, acknowledging the potential emotional impact on Martin if a divorce were to occur. While grappling with the decision to divorce Kevin, Martin expressed his hunger. My mother, seeing my distress, kindly made him hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overwhelmed with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother told Martin, with a warm smile, that she prepared the hamburgers so that he and I could visit whenever we wanted. Taking a bite, Martin exclaimed with joy, praising Gran's hamburgers and expressing a desire to eat them every day. I responded, saying it's because the hamburger contains the love I have for him. In a touching gesture, he took a big bite and offered it to me. Moved by Martin's kindness, my tears couldn't be held back, and even though I tried to stop them, they persisted. My father, noticing Martin's concern, reassured him that my tears were of happiness, not sadness. Hearing this, Martin, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red, realizing the blessing of being with family. I remarked to Martin that family is precious. Surprised, he questioned if Dad had mentioned that only Jane was family. My father gently confirmed it, but then asked Martin if he wanted to live with them as family. With a laugh, Martin happily agreed, making everyone smile. Naturally, despite contemplating divorce, the meal felt so happy that I finally decided to part ways with Kevin. I planned to inform Martin about it, and even though discussing it weighed heavily on my heart, Martin seemed to grasp the situation happily. He expressed the desire to live as a family, embracing the pet dog and calling him his younger brother, despite the dog being older. Preparations for the divorce began, starting with contacting a lawyer who was a friend of my father. The next day, we formalized the contract, and my father and Martin shared comforting laughter while I lay in bed reminiscing about my childhood. The following day, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 calls and messages from Kevin, showcasing his emotional instability. Exhausted, I turned off my phone and, with the lawyer's assistance, explained the situation to my parents. Jane had accumulated significant debt from a casino and shopping addiction, and Brian acted as her guarantor, planning to use my savings. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted, and Brian sobbed upon realizing it was finalized. Despite expecting disagreements about child support, he signed a pledge to pay $340 to Martin every month. In a subsequent call from Kevin, his tone lacked aggression, and he calmly admitted to financial manipulation and explained his complex feelings toward Jane. I firmly asserted my decision not to reconsider and heard his faint sobbing before he wished me happiness and hung up. Remaining strong until the end, I discussed future plans with my parents and decided to stay with them until Martin grows up. I resumed my role as a company president and later learned that Brian and Jane had informed their parents about the divorce and debt, resulting in dissownment. Today, I find happiness being with my family.